Okay, meddling. How many people have ever meddled before? In somebody's business. Meddle. Stick your nose in where it don't belong. Okay. Proverbs 26:17. He who passes by and meddles in a quarrel, not his own, is like one who takes a dog by the ears. Very few of us would be brave enough to take a pit bull by the ears and pull him up, would we? But somehow we are not afraid to meddle in other affairs of other people, are we? Sooner or later, if we don't watch out, we're going to get bit by that pit bull, aren't we? Or come off worse. Solomon, the son of King David, offers us practical advice about getting involved with matters that do not concern us. It's like a dog fight. Therefore, only a fool would put his hand in to separate two dogs, would they? The Hebrew word at the root of this means to become passionately involved in something. The basic meaning refers to a person who arrogantly supposes that he or she has the right to interfere in a quarrel or matters that do not concern them. The verse makes it clear that the meddler is a passerby rather than a witness or a participant in the problem. See, dogs over in Israel were not like the pets we have here. They were called vermin or jackals, and they were very vicious, most of them. So to take one by the ears would be extremely foolish. So without a doubt, it would turn and bite the person that grabbed the dog, wouldn't it? Therefore, the meddler exposes himself to danger because of the people involved trying to do so in their dispute, who are already mad, inflamed, and they might vent their fury on them. Once we are embroiled into a problem that's not our own, sometimes we get involved too much, don't we? And we're not easily free to become embroiled into this problem. Brought into it, not wanting to be brought into it. This is especially true when we do not know all the reasons these problems are disputes of the particulars of it. We will suffer spiritually, mentally, and sometimes physically because of this, if we meddle in other people's business. Meddlers think they are acting as peacemakers and have the wisdom to bring warring parties into unity. Also, the meddler thinks he has the solution to other people's problems, but usually causes more harm than good. In fact, meddling is a sign of foolishness rather than wisdom. It is an honor for a man to cease from strife, but every fool will be a meddling. Proverbs 23. If we meddle, then the reward might be shame. Go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor have put thee to shame. Proverbs 25:8. Those who meddle will not get a medal for their efforts. Unfortunately, we all tend to give our opinions, don't we? or love to intercession attempt, don't we? Because as Christians, we feel that it's our duty to do this, don't we? But the Bible cautions us against this. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's manners. Yet if any man suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. 1 Peter 4:15-16. It is best to simply keep out of other people's arguments, and that are none of your business. Because sometimes you might stick your nose in and get your nose knocked off. What? Yeah, none of your business. Sometimes, no matter how good our intentions are, we cannot help people but must leave them to the Lord. We are wasting our time and resources if we do. Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn them again and rend you. That means they'll come back and slap you upside the head. Okay, in today's scripture, we're going to see that Joab meddling in David's issues here. A really bad decision. Remember, meddlers make matters more miserable. And so often throughout David's reign, Joab, who otherwise was totally loyal, felt that he had to, in this instance, the right to interfere in others, in the affairs of David and Absalom. Often we see Joab meddles when he considers that it might be to his benefit. He just stands back and watches it if it don't benefit him. But if he thinks it's going to benefit him, he's going to be right there trying to instigate and manipulate everything to work out for him. He will later even do it by seeking to promote Adonijah's claims to the throne as the eldest surviving son over against Solomon. Yet he was certainly steadfastly loyal to David in every other way, at least while David was still active. And he had shared with him in his wilderness years. When David was on the run from Saul, he was right there beside of him. So he felt like he knew David personally, everything about David. Thought he knew what David wanted and what he needed. What he probably did have in mind was that Absalom was the eldest son now, since last week we saw where Absalom had killed his brother for raping his sister. So now Absalom is the next heir to the throne. So he thinks, well, if I help him, he's going to have a place for me. He's going to remember me. So that's why he was wanting all this done. See, if he could put Absalom in his debt, then once Absalom succeeded to the throne after David's death, he thought he'd be right up there with him, that he would think he owed Job. His interference here was while possibly with the best intention, because of David's cousin, he knew David's thoughts better than most people. But it would undoubtedly be a chaos on Israel. I can't even say it. I couldn't even say it. Huh? Yeah, it'd be chaotic for Israel because of it. We should remember that by his action, Absalom had already rebelled against the throne once. It should therefore have been clear to all that he was not to be trusted. Yet Joab, using deceit, persuaded David to let him return to Jerusalem against David's own better judgment, thus eventually causing David much harm. The truth was that if Absalom was in return, he should have returned to the city of refuge. And who remembers what the city of refuge is? Okay, the city of refuge was if you killed somebody by accident, you could go to that city and stay there, and they'd hear your case or justified. If you thought it was justified, they'd have a trial for you and say that whether or not it was justified for you to kill a person. Let's say you accidentally hit somebody with a horse. One of your chariots run over somebody accidentally. Then you could go to this city here and have your case up, and then you could stay there, and nobody could come there and kill you.
Kind of like us picking the jury out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if they went to the city that way, they'd be safe to them, but we took the jury out that way, there's no bias.
And sometimes they could go there and they would not be killed also. Okay, back then they had more blood killings than now. Yeah, eye for eye, brother would justify killing somebody else's because of their brother was killed. Or Absalom, if he had done this when it first happened, I think with his brother raping his sister, because that was one of the things for death, rape was. It would have been justifiable. But because he didn't do it, he waited on it for all these years, letting it stew, then it became unjustifiable. And then also he may have could have went there, and they would have ruled it justifiable. You just don't never know how the elders were going to do, whether they decided it was justifiable or unjustifiable. But I think a lot of it's because he had waited so long. So Joab's interference with David allowed himself to be manipulated into the unacceptable position of allowing Absalom to return under safe conduct, while being unwilling to have dealings with him because of his sin. That probably led to a lot of Absalom's rebellion. The only reason why Absalom would want to return from Geshur, where he was royalty there. He was the grandson of the king there too. He was the son of the king of Israel, but he was also the grandson of the king of Geshur, because his mother, she was one of the princesses. So he had the right to succeed the throne in either place, and he was treated like royalty in both places until all this happened. So the only reason Absalom would return from such an honored position as being royalty there is because he would think he was going to be brought back into his position to be the next heir to the throne. So that's why I think a lot of it, he was so mad that he because he felt how David did really feel about him when he come back. So he would have recognized that his succession was unlikely to be approved by David. And in his view, this would leave him with only one alternative, attempted coup. And we're going to see that next week. There is no way that Absalom would have been willing to live peacefully under Solomon's rule or even Arjoni's rule. He would therefore have been best left in Geshur, which he would have been if it had not been for Joab's schemes. One important lesson, though, it comes out of this narrative is that we should be worried about whose advice we listen to. Because a lot of times someone does not have our best interest at heart, do they? So you have to know who you're listening to. Especially if it conflicts with your own conscience. Even though it tends to be in line with what we want. We have on one hand God secretly keeping David and acting on his behalf and protecting him against the consequences of his sin. Because, David was told all this was going to happen before it ever happened. David knew that something was going to happen, but he just didn't know how it was going to happen. Okay, we're going to be in 14, chapter 2 Samuel 14. So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom. Joab witnessed the heartache of David over his son Absalom. He knew David was mourning for his son. He was upset. It had been 3 years since he saw him. Because see, Absalom took off to Geshur when he killed his brother. And that's where he'd been hiding at all this time. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought there a wise woman and said to her, "Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning apparel. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but act like a woman who has been mourning a long time for the dead. Go to the king and speak to him in this matter." So Joab put the words in her mouth. See, during the carrying out of this plan, Joab, he had sent for a wise woman. He didn't even talk to God about it. He didn't send for God, for a priest. He sent for a secular woman. See, David would have sent for Nathan, wouldn't he? A prophet, to ask him his opinion. But he sent for a wise woman. And he was not concerned about what God thought. He was only concerned about what Joab wanted. He called on the woman to pretend to be a mourner, one who was a long-term mourning for the death of a loved one, her long dead husband. Thus she was to wear recognized mourning clothes, and she was not to anoint herself with oil as most Israelite women did on approaching the king. When they go before the king, they anoint themselves with oil. The aim was to move David's compassion and heart to her favor. Then he gave her the words. He told her what exactly to say because he knew what she would have to say to persuade David over to his thinking. So the woman was not necessarily therefore coming forward with the truth. She was putting forth what Joab wanted. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, "Help, O king." When she approached, she made the usual obeisance to the king, falling on her face before him. There was a requirement for all who approached the king. Then she made to the king a plea for his assistance, crying, "Give me your help." Then the king said to her, "What troubles you?" And she answered, "Indeed, I am a widow. My husband is dead. Now your maidservant had 2 sons, and the 2 fought with each other in the field. And there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other and killed him. And now the whole family has revolted against your maidservant." And they said, "Deliver him who struck his brother, that we may execute him for the life of his brother whom he killed, and we will destroy the heir also." So they would extinguish my ember that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the earth. When the king asked her problem, she claimed that she was a widow and had 2 sons, and one of the sons had killed the other son. Seems like David would have caught on to this a little bit, don't it? And they had accidentally killed each other. One had killed the other one in a fight. So the result was that the whole family was demanding blood vengeance. And that's what we was talking about, blood vengeance, against the surviving son, reminding themselves of the heir to his father's property. In other words, their thoughts were that if they got rid of this young man, then they could take the property and leave the widow without nothing, is what she was trying to tell King David. Because back then, they was not really wanting justice. Justice and blood vengeance were simply the excuse. See how clever Joab's words were put into this woman's mouth? See, it was justified the king's sense of justice and fair play. He knew what to tell her to say. The wise woman went on to point out what that would mean for her. She would lose her one hope in life, the one thing that she lived for, the one desirable thing that was left to her. Her life would be snuffed out and quenched because she would not have anyone to take care of her when her old age, because that's how they done back then. The sons would take care of their mothers if they had no father to do it. And also, her husband's name would not be preserved in Israel. See, she was describing what is seen in Israel as the most important things in life. Every Israelite's right was to land, inheritance, a son to support and care for their widowed parents, mother or father when they got where they couldn't do nothing, and the maintenance of a man's name through his descendants. They were all being threatened by greedy men who were making justice their excuse. Then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." The wise woman's words had won David over to her side, as Joab knew they would. And so he informed her to be afraid no longer. He assured her that he himself would issue a royal decree, for the son should not be harmed. It would be under royal protection, and to harm him would be a direct affront to the king. It would be equivalent of being in the city of refuge. The decision was, in fact, to go against established precedent and the laws of the land. And the woman Tekoa said to the king, "My lord, O king, let the inquiry be on me and on my father's house, and the king and the throne be guiltless." The woman then nobly took on herself and her son all the guilt that might accrue from the decision, therefore acknowledging that she recognized the ancient and sacred right was being set aside for her sake. That would impress the king with the clear intention of goodwill towards him, even if it was beyond her power to grant it. It also reminded the listener how serious the request was that she was making. It was indicative of the authority that David felt he now had. So see, really David had no authority to do this. He took it on himself with a royal arrogance that he felt he could override a long-standing law, principle of justice. He was becoming a tyrant is what he was becoming, because he could not grant this. Only God could do this justice. So the king, whoever says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall not touch you any more. See, the king assured her that all she had to do if her relatives caused trouble was to refer to the king, bring them to the king. She was to bring them to him, and they could not touch her. Then she said, please let the king remember the Lord your God, and do not permit the avenger of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. See, this woman emphasized the main point, and David was setting aside blood vengeance. And that's how it was. The law back then was blood vengeance. If someone killed someone, your family, then you had the right to do blood vengeance on them. And apparently, wanting him to realize what a serious thing that was to her, she called on David to make his promise in the presence of God. Let him remember this in any action he takes in the future, not to make an oath to God. And that's what he did. See, the woman still needed the assurance. David gave her what she sought, his solemn oath before God that not one hair on her son's head would fall to the earth. And you know, this is kind of bringing over to Absalom's death. It was because of his hair he was killed. And that was one of his main features, his pride. Therefore the woman said, please let your maidservant speak another word to my lord the king, and say on. Acknowledging the woman said she could put further request. So the woman said, why then have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished one home. Now she gets to what she was wanting to start with. See, she carefully put her new point in there, didn't she? She turned it around on David. What she really wanted. If he can make such a decision as setting aside blood vengeance for someone else, how could he not set aside blood vengeance for himself, for his own son? And that's what she brought to a point to him. That he had banished his own son Absalom. Did he not realize that by being so obstinate, he was harming all the people who loved Absalom and wanted him back there? So while the king was not to be held guilty for what he had done for her son, he was seen to be like one who is guilty for not fetching home his son, his banished son. She carefully avoided describing him as guilty. Was like one who is guilty. He was the king. He could have her killed right there. For we will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled for him. See, she pointed out why we must all necessarily die, becoming like water, gone forever. God still holds life precious. And thus, rather taking away people's lives, he devises a means so they can be saved. And that's what he done with his son, didn't he? He devised a means so his son would come to this earth and die on a cross so we could all be saved. See, his presence no longer being banished outcast, the implication was that David should be godlike and devise means for bringing back his own son, Absalom, without seeking his life, because life is precious. Now therefore I have come to speak of this thing to my lord the king, because people have made me afraid. And your manservant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his maidservant, for the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the inheritance of God. See, Absalom had won the hearts of the people before he left. He was the king's handsome son. He had not a blemish on his body. And that the people were longing for his return. He would go out into the people and he would talk to them. He wanted the people to love him. Because I think he was stewing all this time in his mind about what he was going to do before he ever killed his brother. He knew when he killed him, then he would be the next heir to the throne. So he was going out and wanting everybody to be subject to him. Because the king stayed up in the palace all the time. He didn't get out anymore with the people. Absalom did, though. He'd sit at the gate and he'd draw the people in and he'd judge them like a judge and tell them everything's going to be good, and he'd listen to their cases. So the people loved Absalom. And we're going to see later on that's why they followed him and why David ran. She then expressed, your maidservant said, the word of the Lord the king will now be confirmed, for as the angel of God, so is my lord the king in discerning good and evil, and may the Lord your God be with you. See, the having in mind that David was a comfort to his people, they saw him as a messenger, as an angel of God. In 1 Samuel 29:9, one who could discern from good and bad. And she closed off the prayer with Yahweh his God would be with him, and especially making the right decision. Then the king answered and said to the woman, please do not hide from me anything that I ask you. And the woman said, please let my lord speak. See, the cleverness of this woman's approach is evident. She had proceeded to talk the king into repelling a blood vengeance case. And he was shrewd, though. People are not going to... David was a very shrewd man, and he was beginning to recognize what was behind her asking this, that it was someone else that had been trying to persuade him to bring Absalom back. So he challenged her not to hide anything, in which she agreed. So the king, is the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman answered and said, As you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken, for your servant Joab commanded me. And he put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant. To bring about this change of affairs, your servant Joab has done this thing. But my Lord is wise according to the wisdom of the angel of God to know everything that is on this earth. See, he knew that it was Joab, didn't he? By some of her words that was behind it. And she thought she was so clever that she was taken totally by surprise, didn't she? Because she thought she had duped David into accepting that the account was true. See, this wasn't even a true thing that happened. She was just trying to turn it around on David so he'd bring Absalom back. So she blamed it squarely on Joab, because she hoped he would spare her life. Because when she lied to a king, she could be killed. That she knew that the king knew everything. She started admiring him, telling him everything, that he knew it all. He was discerning. He knew how the people turned, whether they turned to the left or the right. And that she admitted that it was Joab that was really trying to deceive him. And see, that's why we have to be discerning with our own. We have to know who to listen to and who we need to listen to, don't we? You can't just listen to anybody, because they may not have your best interest at heart. Even David was not immune to this kind of excessive flattery, the kind of flattery so offered to kings. And the king said to Joab, All right, I have granted this thing. Go therefore and bring back the young man Absalom. Apparently Joab was in the room listening to all this. He follows what David felt by the decision that he had made an oath, and now he had to go through it, even though it had been obtained by deceit. So he went and he promised the woman applied to Absalom and him alone. The king informed him to go bring Absalom back. You notice the king didn't go get Absalom. He had Joab, since Joab instigated all this and manipulated him to do all this. He decided, okay, you go bring him back now. And you're going to be responsible for him now. So this is brought out by the fact that later he would not even acknowledge Absalom to allow him in his presence. He was not at all pleased about having been manipulated this way. He felt bound by this decision that was reached, and Joab had in fact served him a very bad turn, something that would rebound on both of them in the future. Has any of y'all read any of this later on? I know you have. Then Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, Today your servant knows I have found favor in your sight, my lord, O king, in that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. When Joab learned that David was fulfilling his oath, he fell on his face like he was supposed to, in obstinance, expressing his gratitude and great humility because he had found favor in David's sight. Because see, David could have had him killed right there for manipulating and lying. He was probably also relieved that David didn't have him killed. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Then following up on David's permission, he arose and went to Geshur, and he brought him home to Jerusalem. With great pomp, no doubt Joab and Absalom was expecting him to be fully instated into the royal family. But David didn't do that, did he? David was only doing this because he had felt he had made an oath to him. So he had turned out to be Absalom. The oath had been tricked on him. And the king said, "Let him return to his own house, but do not let him see me, my face." So Absalom returned to his own house, but he did not see the king's face because of the scheming of Joab and the folly of David in his dealings, when the wise woman of Tekoa, Absalom, could return to Jerusalem. But he was unforgiven. Thus he was not restored to his former status as the king's son. He was treated as an outcast in his own house, and he was left there. And see, Absalom had a lot of pride. See, he thought he would be honored with pomp and circumstance, and he'd be brought in like this king, that king's son that he was going to be. But instead, he was told to go stay at his own house, to stay there. And he expected to be reinstated as the king's son, but instead it turned into hatred for his father. Because even though it was probably stoked also from the fact that he was living in the same house as his sister Tamar, the princess, who had been raped by her brother, and he knew that was the reason that he had done all this. And see, had David dealt rightly with Ammon, none of this, a part of the rape, would have happened. And Ammon's execution might have assisted Tamar in coping with her problem, or dealing with her shame, and putting her on the road to recovery. Much of it lay at David's door. Because all this happened because David didn't deal with the problem. And see, you know, that's what happens with us sometimes when we don't deal with our problems. We just try to numb them or overcome them, or we don't even we just try to wipe them out of our mind, don't we? We just try to not deal with them. We just go in our own shell, run away, and just don't want to do nothing with them. But see, that's when we're Christians, why we have it so much better than other people who are not Christian people. We have someone that we can talk to about our problems, and someone that can help us deal with our problems. So, I don't know, the Spirit is kind of talking to me here. How many of y'all have heard my testimony? I'm going to kind of change this. I know some of the older ones have. I grew up in a household, my daddy was alcoholic. He was very abusive of my mother. He beat her constantly. He tried to kill her. We'd have to hide in the woods when he'd be shooting at her, and he'd be shooting at us, and we'd be running and hiding. And I remember bullets hitting the trees where we was close to. But you see, I always felt like I had someone protecting me. You know, I am 63 years old, so this happened when I was about 8 years old. So that was a long time back then. And our neighbors would hear my daddy shooting at us. And they'd come down there and they'd take, instead of doing something about it, they'd just take the gun away from him. And he would have my mother all beat up. She'd be bloody. He'd try to kill her. Every time I remember as a little girl having to grab a hold of him and try to keep him from killing her. And we all think, well, our problems doesn't affect anybody but ourselves. Anything we do doesn't affect anybody but ourselves. But it does. It affects our whole family. It affects my mother. It affected me and my sister. My sister still is holding on to unforgiveness because of all this that happened to us as children. Because of the way my mother was abused, then she turned out and take her abuse on me and my sister. See, David didn't deal with the problem. My daddy never dealt with the problem. My mother never dealt with the problem. Everybody in the community, everybody I talked to when I got older, I'd hear them say, well, we knew how your daddy always done. Okay, if you knew it, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you do something? Because people, they didn't meddle back then. I think a lot of it is when you should have. But I always had someone I could talk to, and that person was my grandmother. Or I had this little red bird. I'd climb up in the tree, and I always said that was my guardian angel. When my mother would beat me, and she'd lock us in the closet or we had like a utility room, and she'd lock us in there a lot of times. But I would crawl out the window and go hide in the woods till my daddy got home. Or my sister, that's what she would do. So I'd climb up in the tree because I knew my mother wouldn't find me up there. And I had this little bird would always come and sit beside of me. And I remember that so much that I'd sit there and I'd just talk to it. Because I felt like that's all I had. And I felt like that was by the Lord sending something for me to cling to. Because I knew that it was a God thing that I'm here today. It's a God thing that I was put on this earth, and I knew I had a purpose. And that's how we have to be. Everybody has a purpose. You may not think you have a purpose, but you have a purpose. It may be just to reach one person. If you reach one person, that's your purpose. And I feel like that's my purpose. It may be just to tell somebody what God has done for me. He has done so much for me. He pulled me out of my life that I had before. I should be dead. My mother beat me so bad one time that it broke 3 of my ribs. I was bleeding. And if it hadn't been for my sister and her best friend, she would have killed me with a fire poker. And I never knew what I did. I had to go hide until my daddy got home. And he realized then I could not stay in that house or she was going to kill me. So he took me somewhere else. Well, then I thought, whoo, my life is so much better. It wouldn't. Because I got into another situation where I started dating this guy. And I met him in church. So you better watch out who you turn to. And he was supposed to be this big, upstanding church person. He wasn't. He ended up raping me, taking me to a well, throwing me in a well. And I stayed there till someone come and found me. And the only reason they found me to get me out of that well is because they knew he had done this before. I was not the first person that he had done this to. And it's because of who his family was, nothing was ever done. Because it would be my word against his word. And I believe it was a God thing that I'm here. Because I could have died. And Mike told me to emphasize that this was a dry well. It wouldn't have, didn't have, it might have had about that much water in it. Back then, the wells would dry up after a while. And it was at this old house place. So I feel like we all have a purpose. And God has a plan for every one of us. Just like he had a plan for David. He had a plan for everything that happened to David. He knew that David was an overcomer. And that's how he knows about us. We're all overcomers. And we just have to accept that we're overcomers, don't we? When we accept that, we can do everything, can't we? So I feel like everybody says, oh, you just don't know how my life is. You just don't know what everything's been done to me. There's nothing you can tell me that's been done to you that probably has not been done to me. So if I can overcome it, you can overcome it by the blood of Jesus Christ. And that's how I done it. Because I always knew that God loved me, that Jesus died for me, and that he was going to take care of me. So no matter what happens in your life, you got to rest on that assurance that he loves you. Bad things happen to good people. We just have to know how to overcome them. We just have to know how to take it in stride, don't we? Because he loves us, and he's going to help us get through anything that is coming at us. Dear Heavenly Father, I ask you to touch each one of these men and women here, dear Lord, and just let them know that how much you love them, dear Lord, and how much you want everything good for them in their life, dear Lord, and that they can overcome anything, the wiles of the devil that comes against them. In your name I pray. Amen.